in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. We're back today, and I hope that y'all have had a great Christmas so far and having a good holiday so far. And, you know, it's interesting. I asked a question the other day on Facebook and on social media, and I wanted to get an idea of how people felt. I wanted to get an idea of what was on people's minds. I want to get an idea of the things that they want to change. I wanted to get an idea of what matters most. And if you could change one thing in this world, one thing, what would it be, and how would you go by changing it? And I think this is a good question to ask because I think many of us want to change something. We want to change something. There's something that we want to change. Many of us are interested in trying to figure out what that is that we can change, but how do we go by doing it? And I found that a lot of times we can be overwhelmed. You know, we can be overwhelmed in this situation where it's like, what do I change? What can I change? What is the power that I have? What do I have that I can do? What can I contribute? What can I do in this society to make it better? You know, we're either part of the problem or we're part of the solution. How do we become part of that solution, right? How do we become that solution that's so important? How do we become that change maker? How do we become part of the world changers to make changes that are important, that are inspiring, and that actually live the test of time? And, you know, I've asked this question, and there's a lot of folks out there, you know, that have various different thoughts, and I like a lot of where we were going with this, to be quite honest with you, because I feel like there was something about it that really connected when I asked this question. If you could change one thing in the world, what would it be, and how would you go about changing it? And some people have talked about various things, about abuse in all forms. You know, how would they change it? You know, they didn't have an idea. They didn't know what to do. You know, some people had commented about standing up for injustice and how to stand up for injustice, telling the truth rather than being afraid or intimidated. Solves a lot of problems. Some people talked about changing the justice system and working with people who are addicted and trying to work with them instead of throwing them in jail. Some other folks talked about working with narcissistic abuse and healing narcissistic abuse in families. And that's something that I really get behind 100%. And that's something that I work with on a day-to-day basis, you know, healing people from abuse that they don't really even know is abuse. See, that's the thing, is that narcissistic abuse is something that is sometimes undercover for people. It's like the thing that you're not expecting. You don't understand it. You don't see it. Many of us were raised in narcissistic family dynamics where we didn't know what we were dealing with was, you know, narcissistic. You know, when you're raised around it as a child, you know, it's interesting because it's not something that it's not like you get a handbook, you know, when you're born and you're like, well, these are the tendencies of narcissism and this is what you look for, you know, if you're dealing with narcissism. No, we don't get that. We know that we have two parents and, you know, or maybe one parent, or maybe we're raised by grandparents, and that's what we do. We don't know if the people are narcissistic. We don't know if there's something else going on. You know, we don't understand that stuff, and I do think that healing narcissistic abuse begins with knowledge. You know, in order to know that you're dealing with this abuse, you have to know what you're dealing with. In order to know what you're dealing with, you have to be educated on it, and the list goes on. Another person said tolerance. Just because you don't always agree with somebody doesn't mean that they're wrong. You know, someone else said that they want other people to exercise patience. And to be patient around other people, and they're going to begin by being patient in their own life. Someone else mentioned greed, rising from selfishness. And, you know, they said, I suppose, first and foremost, it's a matter of awareness of one's own greedy tendencies. As we mature, we have to let go of selfish focus and shift toward how we can contribute. And it was very interesting, you know, talking about how society can change and how we can change, you know, and be a better person than we were yesterday. Talking about human greed, another person brought up. Some people talked about the limiting of powers of certain folks. Just because you have money doesn't mean that you should, be in control of the government. Health-wise, some people were talking about health and really teaching people to eat healthier, to live healthier, to be healthier, to choose healthy. And, that's something that I've realized. I was watching a music video yesterday when I was working out before Christmas late launch. And I was watching some music videos when I was working out. And one of them was interesting because I see that the singer in the song actually was, shopping, and in the grocery cart there were all of these vegetables and fruits. And I realized that he was trying to open people's eyes to what they should be eating. And I thought that was interesting. It was very subtle, right? It was very subtle. Justin Timberlake. It was a video of Justin Timberlake's, and I can't remember the movie that it went with, but it was a film, a children's film. I guess adults too, but animation. And it was cute, but you can see there's like little things, and it's like, a lot of people do not know what healthy food is. They've never been around healthy food. They've never been taught how to eat healthy. They've never been taught, that healthy is something good. It's not been taught. They weren't raised in an environment like that. And so how do you begin to help people to understand those types of things? And I think that everybody can contribute to the knowledge piece and understand that there's something that we can teach others, or something that we can discuss, there's something that's true and direct to our heart that we can put out there, that we can emphasize, that we can help people to understand. And I think that's powerful, and I think all of us have a knowledge base on something that's important for the world to accept and to look at. I like some of the other comments that people said, about helping the hungry. Trying to help, people that are hungry, that do not have food and supplies. And as we know, right now, even in the United States, more than ever, we're having a crisis. There are a lot of people that can't afford to eat around the world, and in the United States as well, and helping with some of those food banks and contributing and doing what you can. These are things that you can do. These are things that you can do. These are things that you can assimilate a group. These are things that you can get your friends and family to start doing. This is something that you can help your company start doing. If you work with a company, you can go to some folks there and talk about what you would like to do. How do you want to give back? How do we give back? How can you do it at a bigger level? Because I know that some of us are trying to do it as much as we can, but it's hard when it's just one person. So how do you streamline that and make it a bigger cause? How do you streamline it, and how do you make it a bigger play? What do you do? I also like, some of the other comments, about, dealing with abuse, and overcoming that type of abuse in the family dynamic. Unconditional love, that's a good one. And most people said I'm going to start with changing myself. Change starts with me, becoming a better I can help others in becoming a better them. I like that. And I thought that was really, really a good one. I also like the concept about, making focal point on mental illness and understanding that mental illness is something, and not to turn the blind eye to it. I think that most societies and around our world wants to act like mental health is not a big deal, that mental illness is nothing, and that it contributes to none of our problems in this country and in this world, but it contributes to most of our problems in this world. There's a lot of people that are in places of power that probably shouldn't be, based on their mental illness. There's a lot of mental illness, and we sweep it under the rug. We look at things like, people who are ruthless and always get their way. That seems to be the right way of action when it's not. And, it's about creating an environment where people feel comfortable. It's about creating an environment where people feel solid. It's about creating an environment, whether it's at your home or at work or in your church or wherever that looks like, that makes you feel comfortable. I think that there's also, some other concept about war. People are wanting to get out of war. I did not realize that we've been in war for a very long time. For a very, very long time. Child abuse, homelessness, and the list goes on. And there's so many to talk about, but it's interesting because I think that many people have something to say, and I think that if you're listening to this show, you definitely have something to say. Now, how do you assimilate that? How do you say it? What do you do about it? How do you get the word out? What is it that you can do to begin to talk about what matters to you most? I know that many of you probably have social media of some sort, whether it's Instagram or Facebook, or another type of platform, or Twitter or whatever, but there's got to be something that you can put out there on a large level, perhaps creating a blog about what matters to you, organizing something at a grassroots effort within your town or city, organizing something as a grassroots effort in your corporation, your company, where you work, or your school. What does that look like? How do we assimilate that? How do we connect with that? What do we do? And I think that there's a lot of things that can be done. It's just depending on how we get started. Where do we begin? And so I'm asking you the question, if you could change one thing in this world, what would it be, and how would you go by doing it? Because a lot of times we can sit there and argue and get frustrated, and I've gotten frustrated a lot too. I've gotten frustrated a lot too. It's easy to get frustrated. It's overwhelming sometimes. It's like, what the heck is going on here? What are we dealing with? Why has the world gotten to this? But has it gotten to that, or has it always kind of been like this? I think that technology makes it more interesting because we have things happening at real time, but we also seem to be bombarded by everything that's happening at real time. We're bombarded by it. We're overwhelmed by it. It's too much. Where do we begin? And so I'm asking you first off, what matters most? What matters most to you to change? And I think that question needs to stick with you. To me, that's kind of like that's the indicator of what matters most to you. I know that we can see issues and stuff that's happening around our world, and we can get behind something, and then we can change our mind and we find something else to be very important. It's not like everything's not as important as the other things, but it depends on what really connects with us. And that's the most important thing. What really connects with you? What are the things that, bar none, is very important for you to change, or you have to be some sort of involved within that change? Because doesn't it feel good to be involved in positive change? Doesn't it feel good? Doesn't it feel good to give back? Doesn't it feel good to be able to look at something and say, wow, I created that? Stay tuned. We're going to be talking more about change, how you can make the change, what you can do, and how do you figure out exactly what you want to get behind, okay? Later on in the hour, Dan Nelson is joining us with our historical perspective and Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time, 2 shakes.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Great to be back, and today we're talking about changing the world, what you can do to change the world, how you can change it, and what you can change, and how to actually make that a reality. I feel that a lot of times we get overwhelmed because we don't really know how to change it, right? What do we do? Like, we have ideas about what's important to us. I know that some of you, animal rights are very important to you. For me, it is. The fact of, spousal, child, abuse of any sort, animal cruelty, all that stuff is very, It's overwhelming, and I think sometimes we can see all these things, but it's like, what do we do about it? How do we assimilate solution? What do we do? How do we become change makers? How do we become change makers? How do we do it? How do we begin to do it? And right before the break, I'd been talking about how to empower ourselves, because we have to either be part of the problem or part of the solution. That is it. End all be all. That is it. Or we're just sitting on the sidelines. And I think sitting on the sidelines is part of the problem. I think we have enough people in our world sitting on the sidelines. I think we have enough people that we see talking about all the problems but don't do anything about the problem. You got somebody in your family that's just like that. You know what I'm talking about. You probably hung out with them yesterday. Everything's a problem. The world's it's going to hell in a handbasket. Oh, God, everything's so bad. It was the worst year ever. And you're like, well, what are you doing to make any changes? You probably held your tongue and passed the bread, please, and just went on about it, and it probably infuriated you. But what are they doing to change things? Nothing. It's kind of actually an insight into their own lives. They're the same people that do nothing to change their own lives either. They just talk about it, but nothing ever gets done. Everything's a problem, everything's horrible, but there is no solution, and I'm just going to live in how horrible this is. And I've been there before where I've gotten upset about things, but I didn't know where to begin. But I try not to get so upset about things, because I've realized that if I don't have a solution for something and it's upsetting me, why don't I have a solution? Why haven't I figured it out? Why haven't I looked within myself to find that solution? What can I do? What can I do? Is there something I can do? What can I do to make things work? What do I need to connect with? And I asked this question right before the break, and I'm going to ask it again. What matters most to you to change? What matters most? What is the thing that you go, God, if I could work on being a solution maker to this particular problem, and I could assimilate people together to work on it, this would really just connect with me, would feed my soul, would really help me, and would give me whatever that empowerment is. And I would feel empowered, and I could help other people to be as empowered as myself. And that's what I want you to think about, because this is where we find it, right? This is where the rubber meets the road. And it's like what I've realized too, that if you're a change maker, the last thing you can do is hang out with people that don't make any changes. If you are a person that makes waves, you've got to be around other people that are okay with getting splashed. Okay, when you're hanging out with people on the sidelines, you got nothing. When you hang out with people that talk but don't do, we become a product of our environment. And we know that there's a lot of folks that are in our government today that talk about everything and don't do anything. They've been around for years. They still haven't done anything. 20, 30, 40 years, still nothing done. But it's like, you also have friends and family like that too. So if we are change makers, the last thing we want to do is to be around people that aren't making any change. When I return, I'll be talking more about the concept of change. What matters most? How do you assimilate it? How do you make it work? How do you find it? And how do you connect with it and actually create this change as your reality? Later on in the hour, Dan Nelson's going to be here in just a few minutes to give his historical perspective. Because, once we know history, we know what we've gone through, right? So we don't make the same mistakes again, because what? History repeats itself. That's what our whole world is about. Over and over again, we do things over and over again. And the people that know their history know it. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Okay, we're talking about world changing today. We're talking about what we can do to change the world, what we can do and how we're going to change it. What changes are we going to make? What are we going to do to make those changes, and what really matters to us most? I always think that it's very interesting. The whole concept is that when we think about changing and we think about changing something, it has to be something that's very, very important to us. It has to be something that really matters to us. And we have to be able to impart that to other people on this planet to get them to see the value. You can't just do it all on your own. I mean, I get it. I tried. But there's got to be something that you can impart with other people and get them connected. And I think it's interesting because it's like, when we think about changing, and I've asked you this question, what matters most to you to change? Is it educating people? Is it stopping abuse? Is it stopping animal cruelty? Is it what is it? What is it? Is it feeding people? Is it helping people get out of poverty? What is it? And what do you want to do about it? And how do you want to change it? And how are you going to use the gifts that you have? How are you going to use the gifts that you have to make this a reality? How are you going to use the gifts that you have to make this a reality? And I know that's a big question because it's like, okay, how do I do that? I know that I know that I want to do this. So what I figured out too is that a lot of times in society we think very black and white. We don't think in the gray. The gray is all we got. There's somewhere in the middle. Like anything else, when people have two different stories, it's somewhere in the middle, right? It might be a little over to one side or the other, but for the most part, somewhere in the middle. And I think that when we're dealing with black and white, well, it's either all got to be taken care of or none of it. If I don't do this, then it's not worth it. But every little small thing that we do creates a large ripple effect. Okay? The ripple effect. And think about how many people you affect. How many people do you affect? Think about it. How many people do you affect on a day-to-day basis? Okay. Is it 2? Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 20? Is it 100? Is it 200? Is it 1,000? Is it 10,000? How many people? Think about it. And out of those people that you affect, by whatever you do, what are you doing to affect them positively? What are you doing to make change in their life? Even if you just come into contact with 2 people a day, what do you do to impact their life in a positive way? What is the impact that you have on them? Do they sit there and think about you and go, oh my God, when I think about this person, I realize, or I think about this person and I go, man, that they make me feel like I should be doing more. I feel like when I'm around them, I feel empowered. Or they really do things to empower people, or they really do care, or whatever it is. What are you doing to be that person? What are you doing to impact the world? What are you doing to empowering other people? And I know that that's an interesting question, but it's like I started looking. This was years and years ago. I think it was about 11 years ago. And maybe a little longer than that. Actually, no, it was about 11 years ago, and it was a fall day, I remember. And I remember, I caught somebody watching me do something when I didn't know that anybody was watching me. And I was doing the right thing. But I do the right thing all the time. At least I try to. And some people aren't ever watching you. And I didn't think about it. And I remember I saw somebody out of the corner of my eye, and I realized it wasn't just somebody, it was several people. And I realized that even at the times that you don't think anybody's watching, they are. So what are you doing to impact them? What are you doing to impact the world? Even when you don't think anybody's watching, what are you doing? Even if it's small. Some of you environmentalists out there, totally respected. Where are we grassrootsing it? We can sit there and talk about global change and all this stuff, but what about in your own hometown? What about on your own block? What about in front of your own house? One of the things that I can't stand is kids and adults. I think it's okay to throw out all their trash from their car on the floor, on the ground, outside. I mean, every time I see that, it's just a bummer. It's really sad that some people were raised with absolutely no care about our environment at all. I mean, it's sad. It really does. It's just horrible. It's just, it's not right. And I go up and I'll pick up a lot of this stuff. But, that's where we start. There's certain things that we can start doing. Educating kids that even though mom and dad might have thrown all their crap out of the car, does not make it right. Okay? catching it, not being mean when you catch it, but catch it and be like, what are you doing? What's going on? Why did you start doing this? There's a trash can right here. Can we talk about why you're doing this? I mean, helping people, not accosting them, not getting angry with them, but finding a way to awaken people to the truth. Ignorance is not bliss. I think that the ignorant think it is, but unfortunately, and as we know, once you are no longer ignorant, it's a lie to continue to do it. Once we are no longer ignorant, we cannot act like we're just getting away with it. We have to actually accept some sort of responsibility, or we have to numb ourselves so we don't remember the responsibility. And I know some people are out there doing that right now, but I think that the most that are listening to this show are responsible, take responsibility, and want to make change and are constantly making that change. And I want you to think about that, focusing that energy into something specific and working to make that change. You know, history is important. And one of the things that I've realized is that we do repeat ourselves in this country and in this world. And if you don't realize about war and all kinds of different things, racism, genocide, all this stuff has already happened. Okay, but it's interesting to learn a little bit more about history and some things that people are doing good and making good change. Dan Nelson, our resident historian and genealogist, is here to talk about some history. Dan, great to have you live on the show. How are you doing?
Good. Merry Christmas or day after. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you on. Merry day after Christmas to you.
So this what I'm going to talk about today is a guy that, I keep running into this guy as I do research and just his influence. And he's really, in my opinion, sort of highly underrated in history in terms of how it treated him and records his impact. And so when you sent out your deal on Facebook this week about, what would you change if you, had the impact and so forth, what you were just talking about. And I gave it some thought. Of course, mine's a historical perspective. And I thought, do I have a good example of somebody that saw a need for change and actually took great measures to see that happen? So I'll go through a little bit of that with you. This guy's name was John Knox, and he lived in the 1500s. And he's a Scotsman. And Scotland was pretty backwards at the time, but if you went into the priesthood, you could go elsewhere and get educated. So he did, and he went from Scotland to England, and he actually first got in trouble because he preached against the veneration of the Virgin Mary, and so they burned him in effigy, of him. So therefore, he right away started with some controversy. But he went, sort of had to escape from England at that time, so went to Germany and Switzerland, and he hung out with a lot of the major influences of the time, the formation of the Protestant religion. And he went back finally to Scotland in 1544, greatly enlightened, spending time with, these leading folks. It was bad timing on his part, though, because Mary, the infant Mary, Queen of Scots, her mom was the Queen Mother, and along with Cardinal Beaton, they decided to persecute the Protestants that had taken root in Scotland. So, and meanwhile, he'd been traveling with the guy who was doing a bunch of preaching. He was even this guy's bodyguard. So you think of, you have a priest and who's assistant priest. He carried a two-handed sword in order to defend him, or sword. And so if you think about it, when you think of priests, you don't think of having to defend themselves, unless you watch a lot of those, movies like Game of Thrones kind of stuff. And so anyways, they seize this guy, the cardinal sees this Wishart guy, and he arrested him, and Knox was going to stay with him. He said, no, you need to go on. One of us is enough of a sacrifice. So he did, and sure enough, they burned Wishart at the stake. So apparently some of the Protestants didn't care for that, so Cardinal Beaton was murdered in his castle, and they took over his castle at St. Andrews, the golf place. Mm-hmm. And so anyways, they're all there at St. Andrews, and John Knox became the main minister to preach a sermon to these folks. Well, then they decided, okay, these people aren't going to leave, so we're going to get the French to help us kick them out. So they did that, and they arrested them all the Protestant nobles and these ministers and all. So their punishment was they made them all galley slaves. So they were chained to benches, and they had to row throughout the day, no change of posture with a guy standing over him with a whip. I mean, just like you see in the movies. And they had to row to France and then up the rivers there. They eventually let some of the Protestant ministers go to castles over there, Protestant lords go to some of the castles, sort of be imprisoned there. But we're not really sure, but for some reason in 1549, Henry of France arranged with Edward VI of England to release all the remaining folks. So they were all let go. So he preached some more, and then unfortunately, because he was attacking having a female regent, because he didn't care for Mary, Queen of Scots, who was persecuting the Protestants. She was a Catholic, but her cousin, her half-sister, Queen Elizabeth, didn't take it well, that he didn't care for female regents when she became the queen. So he sort of paid for that for a long time. But then he headed out back to Switzerland, Germany, England, Scotland, traveled all over. And his final, what I would call major and most significant contribution, I really shared the rest with you to just let you know he wasn't, didn't lead a charmed life to get to these conclusions. He could have easily given up and said, this sucks. You get burned in effigy, you get burned at the stake, you become a galley slave, I'm not going to take any more risks. But he felt the missing piece for the common man to move up in life and make your own decisions was, one, you had to be able to read the Bible and not have somebody else tell you what was in the Bible. So he felt that you needed to have schools to teach people to read. So he came up with what was called Knox's Book of Discipline, and he basically said we need family instruction, church instruction, parish schools, grammar schools, and universities to teach people how to read. And that system, that Book of Discipline, really is basically the foundation of England, but even more so America's national education system we have today. So this guy in the 1500s took the steps, the formative steps that caused us to get to that point. And really, if you look at Scotland, it was a pretty backwards place, and due to their high rate of literacy, far more than other countries, because everybody else was like, hey, the preacher will tell you what you need to know. You couldn't really read and interpret on your own. And this high rate of literacy, they basically ended up becoming sort of the masters of invention, the bureaucrats, the lawyers of the British Empire, and eventually America. And so anybody out there with just a glimpse, a wee bit, I guess you'd say, of Scottish heritage can take some pride in what this guy accomplished. But unfortunately in Scotland, he's a little controversial. So they sort of seem to have forgotten him because his grave lies unmarked in the middle of a parking lot.
Seriously?
Yeah. So, hopefully nobody parks over his grave. But, yeah, it's not one of these revered places for some reason. Of course, there's people today, obviously, that don't agree with the American education system. So maybe some people in Scotland have a problem with that, or I don't know. It was just sort of, when I read that, I thought, wow, sort of, not exactly an exclamation point on his life, but he accomplished a lot. I mean, we owe a lot of our literacy to this man. Not that somebody 100 years, 200 years later wouldn't have done something about it, but he did do something about it. He didn't wait for someone else, and he took great risks. I mean, we could see what happened to him. Well, worse things could happen. He could have lost his life trying to promote that literacy, because when you give somebody the ability to interpret on their own, you take away the power of the others that are saying, I'll tell you what you need to know. Mm-hmm. And, that's what he accomplished for us.
Well, it's true. It's like because otherwise they have the power to tell you what they want you to know, and they just leave out what they don't want to tell you.
Exactly. And I mean, that's one of the great benefits and privileges of democracy, and one of the risks of not being democratic is that things can get left out, and you only hear the story they want you to hear.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. You can. There's a lot of governments around our world right now that are practicing that exact stuff. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Tell people what they want to talk about, leave the rest of it out. Interesting
right.
times. It's too bad the guy's in an unmarked grave in the middle of a parking lot somewhere. But very interesting, though. You're right. We did help with the literacy. He did contribute to that, and that's pretty impactful. That's a world changer right there.
Yeah, Yeah, so I was thinking as I wrote this, probably more people know about Johnny Knoxville than they do about John Knox. But maybe we've changed that a tiny bit.
I think we did.
Some Scotsmen will go over there and put a monument in the parking lot.
Yeah, let's go put a monument over there. Maybe one of us will do this from watching the show. Dan, I appreciate your segment. Awesome. History does help us when we're trying to be talking more, and it really does help us to understand what could happen in the future. We'll be talking more about change making and what you can do. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess. Will be back. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. What a great show. We had a great segment with Dan, and I loved his historical segment. I thought it was very powerful. And, it's interesting what people have done and what people have created on our planet, and the good things that they have done and the things that they have accomplished are powerful. And, it's like, what are we wanting to be known for? What are the things that we want to be known for in our life? What do we want to be known for? What do we want to create? What's important to us? What's important to us? What is our goals? What are some things that we can contribute? Is it helping educating people? Is it helping to feed people? What is it? What is it about? What is it that we can do to contribute to our society today with something that we actually care about, that we want to change? You can't sit there and try to change something that you don't care about. You can't sit there and try to change something that you don't have concern about, that you don't have that passion about. Without that passion, what are we going to do? Nothing. I mean, what do you do? Without passion, we have nothing. Without passion, we have to have passion. We have to want to make a change. We have to want it. We can't just want it. We want to see it through. We've got to see it actually come to fruition. But we got to be part of the making process. But how do we do it? It's about really seeing the solution. It's about figuring out how to empower other people. It's about how to offer solution to people. It's about how to help people. It's about what we can do to impact our planet. What can we do to impact the children? What can we do to impact the adults? How can we offset something that is a big systemic problem in our country? Is it hunger? Is it the starvation concept? Is it education? What is it? And how do we make those changes? And I want you to really think about that, because that's a powerful place to be, is that when we start thinking about solution and making massive change, we stop putting our brain in places we don't need to be at. We don't need to sit there and be talking about gossip. We don't need to be talking about the latest Kardashian situation. I found that our brain power, if used properly, can go a long way. Our brain power, if used properly, can go a long way, but many of us aren't really focusing on the solutions that we can make. And I think that if we look at life this way, we begin to see not only solution, but we begin to see why we were here. Why were we put here? What are some things that we can do to impact the world on a huge level, to impact, to make change, and to empower, not only empowering other people, but also empowering ourselves? What can we do? What are some of the talents that you have that you can use for this right now and actually make it work? What are some of the talents that you have? Let's think about that. What are our talents? What are our skill set? How do I use my talents and skill set to make change? Am I good at organizing people? Am I good at bringing people together? Am I good at getting the word out? Am I good at what am I good at? What talents do I have? What things do I have at my disposal that a lot of people don't have? And how do I use that? You know what I'm saying? Like, think about it. Maybe you work for a large corporation and you know a lot of people at the company and people like you. Organize some people. Get them wrapped up in what you want. Some people are just looking for something to do. They want to impact the world. They just don't know what to do or how to do it or where to begin or any of that. But they'll look to you for some of those answers and they'll follow you. So start figuring that out. Start thinking about that. What are some things that you can contribute right now? What are some things that you can do right now? What are some things that you can begin to plan right now? I'm not saying let's plan in 5 years. I'm talking about right now. I know that there's a lot of food banks that are doing stuff right now trying to get food. There's a lot of people, because of the situation with this COVID mess. I mean, taking people out of work for months hurt a lot of people. What do we do? How do we change this? How do we help those people that have lost their businesses? Because, we can all go to Vegas and gamble, but, we just can't go to that mom and pop, restaurant down the street to eat. We got to think about that. What can we do to begin to make change that can help us? What can we do to change the equation of the educated versus the uneducated? How can we do that? What can you do in your own backyard to help the people that need help? Think about it. Small things, small acts of kindness to begin with. Small things. Put your mind to it. Focus on what you can do to empower others, because that directly empowers you. What matters most to you, and what do you want to change? I know that you can figure this out. I know that you can organize. I know that you can assimilate, because I believe in you. If you haven't already, check out the website, AshleyBurgess.com. Ashley, BERGES.com. Check out the YouTube channel for new video content every single week. Go to YouTube and put in Ashley, BERGES. We'll see you next week for a new live show here, and Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess. We'll be back in. You know what? I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.